Okay, so we're going to finish up our take a stand, and I just want to let you know that I did eventually decide to take the soft and stable out of the two bag ends. I decided it was a little bit too stiff because one of the things I really love about this bag is that when it's not in use, it really folds down nice and flat, and you can just put it away like that in a drawer or on a shelf or whatever. And with the faux leather and the soft and stable layers, it was too bulky to do that. So I went back and I took it out. So what we need to do now is attach the zipper to the top of the bag. And the basic idea here is that we're going to have the ends matched up over here, and then we'll have a lot of extra zipper tape on the end of the bag that has the loop. So before you sew the zipper on, make sure that your loop is on the right side. Okay, so we're going to have our wrong sides together here. So we're going to have the back of the zipper tape against the lining of the bag. And we're working with the back of the bag first. So you'll have a border here on the front. And again, make really sure that you have your loop on this side, because when we finish this off, we're going to have this extra zipper tape on this side. That's what lets the bag open fully, because you have that extra zipper tape. And then we're going to put a little tab on the end to finish the zipper off, and then this can get tucked into the loop. Okay, so on this end, you want to match up the end of the zipper with the edge of the binding. Okay, your binding should be trimmed even with the tops of the bag. Okay, and then we're just going to clip that in place. The edge of the zipper tape should be even with the top of the bag. Okay, so it should look something like that. Now we're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam, but when you start sewing, you're going to start about 1 inch in from the end. The reason we're doing that is because to finish off this end of the zipper, we're going to be turning the end of the zipper away, and I'll show you how to do that next. So you're going to start about 1 inch in from the end, sew the zipper to the bag with a 1/4 inch seam, and go all the way to the other side, right to the edge of the binding. It is easier to do this part with the zipper open, so if you've sewn across the end of that, you can take that stitching out as needed and move the zipper slide as needed. I'm going to go ahead and open it all the way. Just make sure you have something on this end, either a pin or stitching or something, so you don't lose your zipper pull. You can get it back on if it comes off, but you'd rather avoid it. It's a pain in the neck. Okay, so once you have the zipper sewn on, what you want to do now is put a little pleat in the zipper tape. So I just turned the zipper so the teeth are parallel to the binding. And I'm going to take the zipper tape and fold it up. So that little fold in the zipper tape is against the teeth. Okay, that's going to make that little pleat less noticeable. Okay, and then after you have it like that, a stiletto is helpful to hold this in place as you sew it, if you have one. And then you're going to hold that in place or clip it in place, whatever you need to do, and then continue your line of sewing across the zipper teeth all the way to the end. Okay, so before you do the next step, you want to close your zipper back up, and that's going to help you make sure that your bag is aligned. So in other words, you don't want to sew it so it's off kilter like that or like that. You want the front and the back of the bag to be aligned. So we're going to clip the zipper in place to the other side of the bag, and again, wrong sides together. So I have the back of the zipper going against the lining side of the front of the bag now. Okay, and as you clip that in place, just make sure that your bag front and bag back are aligned. Okay, once you have that clipped in place, what you want to do is open the zipper back up, and then you're going to sew this side of the zipper down with a 1/4 inch seam, and then stop just before the end so you can leave space to do that little pleat that we did on the other side. Okay, when you get almost to the end, you're going to fold a little pleat in the zipper just like we did on the other side, and then continue sewing over the zipper to the edge of the binding. Okay, so next you can trim the little bits of zipper that are hanging off the top of the bag just trim them even with the bag. Okay, next thing we need to do is put on our zipper binding. So what we're going to do here is we're going to sew our zipper binding right on top of the zipper. We're going to start sewing on the free end of the zipper where we have that long piece hanging off. And we're going to align the raw edge of the binding with the edge of the zipper tape. Okay, and we're going to sew that on here with a 1/4 inch seam. And you can open or close the zipper as needed to make it easier to keep everything aligned. And you're just going to keep sewing the binding on, aligning it with that raw edge until you get to the edge of the binding on this side, and then you're going to needle down, and I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so once you get to the very outer edge of the binding on the other side of the bag, the other end of the bag I should say, you're going to needle down, and then in your pattern on the bottom right of page 7 it tells you a certain distance that you need to sew through just the binding. So I just take my ruler and I make a little mark at that measurement, and then I continue sewing with a 1/4 inch seam through just the binding until I get to that mark, and then I needle down. As you're sewing through just the binding, be really careful what you're doing with the rest of the bag, because you risk having the bag pull on the needle while you're sewing, and that can bend your needle, which often leads to breaking the needle. So you want to try to avoid that. Okay, so I sewed through just the binding till I got to that mark and my needle's down. And now what I want to do is I want to leave this loose loop of binding on this end and then continue sewing the binding onto the other side of the bag. So what I need to do is bring the bag around. You're sort of flipping it over. So now we want to continue stitching right here. So we sewed the binding onto this side, we left that loop of just binding, and now we're going to pick up back sewing the binding onto the bag over here. So I'm going to take this edge of the binding and I'm going to lift my presser foot. My needle's down, very important. Lift the presser foot, and then you're going to get this piece of your bag underneath your binding and get this binding right up against your needle. Okay, so I have that end binding right up against the needle, and I put my presser foot back down after I got all the raw edges aligned. Okay, so I hope you can see what I'm doing. That's the binding I already sewed on. That's the loop of just binding, and now I'm going to continue sewing this binding on to the other side of the bag till I get to the very end, this loose end of the zipper at the other end. Okay, so once you have the binding completely sewn on, if you have any excess binding hanging beyond your zipper tape on the unfinished end of the zipper, you can go ahead and trim the binding even with the zipper. Okay, so what we need to do next is bring this binding around the raw edge, and you want to bring it around so the folded edge of the binding covers your stitching, only just barely. Okay, and then you're going to sew the binding down right along the folded edge. I use a top stitch length for that. For me, that's a 3.5. So you're going to go all the way around and sew that down. When you're going to start on this end, and when you get to the part where you sewed through just the binding, you still need to bring the binding around, and you're going to get the folded edge of the binding to cover the raw edge of the binding and just barely cover your stitching line. Okay, you're just going to keep sewing right through there just as you're doing over here. You just won't have anything inside the binding on this end. When I sew my binding down, I find it really helpful to use this 1/4 inch foot that has the little guide on the edge. I find that that gives me the best results with binding. Okay, so once you have the binding sewn down, the last things you need to do are make and attach your zipper tab on that unfinished end of the zipper, and make and attach your zipper pulls if you are making those. I'm not going to be making those because I use these fancy zippers. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. If you are not a member of the ByAnnie Bag Makers group on Facebook, please come join us. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Randy's Roost. Thanks. Bye bye.